I'm ready to slash and burn.
No quarter. I am going to be uncomfortable and all over you from start to finish.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Outside of the Box. And for longer-term Battlebots fans, my guest today, you may know from the past, but he is back on the new season of Battlebots as a judge. Please welcome Fon Davis to the show.
Hello, welcome. Sorry, glad I could make it.
Yeah, definitely. So I have been very excited about this for a while now, and something I've heard from a lot of fans that maybe aren't as into robotics or haven't watched for a while, are like, wow, I don't know that much about Judge Fon, and I'm sitting there like, what are you talking about? Like, because I'm such a fan of like so much that you've done, with the special effects work and the, movies and TV shows and all of that stuff that like, I'm like, how do you not know? So, kind of before we get into the BattleBot stuff in general, tell me a little bit about, getting into robotics and special effects. Like initially, what is it that, made you say, this is what I want to do? This is what I want my career to be.
Yeah. It actually started when I was 7. I saw Star Wars like most kids, but it wasn't Star Wars that became the driving force for me. It was seeing the making of book on Star Wars. And I saw that, and that was the first time I had ever been exposed to the idea of like professional model makers. And I was like, that's a job. I definitely want that job, And so I just kind of set my eyes on it at that age. And I just worked really hard for a very long number of years, of course, until I ended up at the Industrial Light and Magic Model Shop, which was the same shop that I saw in those books. It was actually there where I met Mark Thorpe, and I didn't meet him at ILM, but I met him through the ILM connections, and I learned about the fighting robot sport through Robot Wars. Was the first competition I was in. ILM had its own robot. I just saw it and I thought it looked like amazing fun. I do work in special effects and I do build robots professionally, so it seemed like a natural fit. And I just kind of got hooked on it, and I've been in that community ever since.
Which is great. I think that you're definitely a great part of the community, and it's exciting that you've been doing this for a while, and now you're back to doing the judging thing. But let's kind of talk about when you had a robot, one robot in particular in BattleBots, one of my personal favorites, which is Mecha Catbot. I've said this before, there need to be more cat themed robots. I'm obviously biased. I have 3 cats and I love them, but let's talk about that robot, because I just, I think it was fun.
Yeah, Mouser Mecha Catbot was actually the brainchild of my self and my wife at the time. We went to a robotics event. We went to Robot Wars actually the first year before we competed, and she saw that there weren't a lot of women in the sport. And I, of course, she didn't have to twist my arm, and she said, we should build a robot and fight. And I was like, done. And so I came up with the design of Mouser kind of based on that idea of, a robot that could kind of be a little more feminine than most industrial robots, which are, steel and aluminum with caution tape and red and yellow, paint schemes and things like that. We wanted to do something that was a total antithesis of that, and that was a pink cat. So, and it made it even more enjoyable to defeat people because they'd be defeated by a little cute pink cat.
Right,
really
exactly.
There was a humor behind it, That's something that I had always wanted to bring to my robot, and definitely to the sport, is that kind of sense of humor. I feel like robots are kind of characters, probably because I do work in the motion picture industry and have always been a fan of those character robots. And yeah, we just really wanted to put on a good show. That's what it came down to. And at that time, that was really the focus. It wasn't as competitive, I think, as it became through the years, and it's kind of gone back and forth. And luckily, there's been a good balance, I think, achieved between creativity and competition.
Right. And I talk about that very often on my show because I think it's important, like it's great to build a robot that is, very good at winning, but I think that the creative aspect just, it adds that additional layer to it. So if you can find a robot that does both, I think that's the best case scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's it. That was also the reason we had multiple weapons. Like we only won about half of our matches. I guess that's not terrible, but it's not great compared to a lot of more aggressive robots. But we didn't want to sacrifice the multiple weapons because it had like a spiked tail, a pneumatic spiked tail, had a saw in the forehead, which was arguably not that effective, but kind of threw material and made it more fun. And then the flipper forks, which were actually pretty good for certain competitions, for certain matches. And it was great for the melee, which is where I won my giant nut, was during a melee event. Because we had multiple weapons, we could attack robots if they came from behind or from the front. And so that allowed us to score a lot of points just running around and letting people hit our weapons or hitting them and backing up, going forward. It was like there was no way to avoid our weapons in a melee.
That's a very good point. It is like as silly as an idea that may have sounded to people for a robot, but I mean, like when you do have those multiple weapons, it definitely makes a huge difference in the way that you can fight. So yeah, I mean, it's great that it worked out that way.
Yeah, that was great. And then yeah, no regrets there. Like I said, I got a giant nut for, I think it was 2000 Battlebots. That was oh boy, I can't even remember where we competed. We had competed so many times because I had originally started competing with Robot Wars and then moved on to Battlebots when they had their first competition in Long Beach, and then from there all the way into the Comedy Central show. And then when the show was rebooted and came on for ABC, my plan was actually, I had proposed a robot that was accepted by Battlebots, Greg and Trey, and the team over there, that was going to be like this organic creature. And I had some sponsors lined up and I was going to go for it and compete in the ABC Battlebots. And then my sponsorship fell through. And as you probably know, these robots are very expensive, very time consuming. And without that sponsorship, it looked like I wasn't going to be able to go to the event. And that's when Greg Munson goes, well, if you can't compete, maybe you can come judge. And I was like, yes, please, and that ended up being wonderful. And I had a really great time. And it was always great to see everybody and kind of, be a part of that community and be, stay in touch with that community and get to see all the amazing matches and robots and things like that. And, fortunately, I'm back on Discovery as well. So it's been a wild ride. It's been a lot of fun. It's been many years since Mouser Mecha Catbot.
Yeah, and I'm curious, because I've gotten perspectives from a lot of the builders that have been doing this for a long time. I mean, I've had Christian Karlberg on the show, Jason Bardis on the show. I mean, they've all been doing this for a long time. To get your perspective on, from when this first started 20 years ago to now, what are some of the biggest changes that you've seen in that time within the sport?
Yeah, it's been there's definitely a clear evolution of the sport. I feel like, when we first started, there was maybe 3 dozen of us in a little warehouse in San Francisco, in Fort Mason. And the arena was just a plywood box with a very low wall. Every year we get a little taller, and every year something would get thrown out of the ring, until eventually they had to put a top on it, even a partial top. Things still got through. So now, the evolution of the battle box is a big part of, I think, where we are with the sport now. It's completely enclosed, ventilation system. It's like very complex. So that was part of it. But also on the robot side, there were 3 dozen of us, a lot of us from all different occupations, just building these robots, and mostly just for fun. And they were a little wacky. Some were really high tech, and some were just kind of comedic. there was a robot, kind of a doll on a tricycle that was fighting. There was just some really goofy designs. I remember Team Delta had a really sophisticated robot with an animatronic arm with a blade on it. And they had spent all their time and effort on that, but they still got done like a week before the competition, which I've always been jealous of because I've always finished in the arena with the robot. It's rare that you actually finish early, or it was then anyway. But just in that week, they decided to build a plywood box, put 2 spikes on it, and use really torquey motors that they didn't end up using for their sophisticated robot. And that one ended up going all the way to the competition or the championship and won in the lightweight category. And it was just a plywood box. So it kind of paints a picture of the original competitions. And then we started doing Battlebots, and that's when you really started to see the audience grow, the live audience grow. And Trey definitely took the sport in a different direction and really broadened the kind of larger appeal of the sport and grew that audience. And then when it hit television, that was kind of a milestone in that, but the real shift happened the second year after it was on television, or the second season, because everyone had seen the robots competing. And I think at that time there were still maybe only 36 robots. And then the very next season, I think something like 500 competitors showed up because they had all seen this on television and wanted to do it. And Trey was very accommodating and allowed all these people to compete. And it just exploded. The sport exploded. And I feel like that's when it actually became more competitive. And there was a big shift to the competition being the most important part and less about creative or entertaining robots. And that might have been one of the reasons why the show at a certain point wasn't renewed on Comedy Central. I know that now there's a real drive to ensure that the rules kind of push the robot builders towards the things that the audience really want to see, which is really cool looking robots. Design is a big factor now within the rule set. And then destructive power and aggression are also things that audiences really want to see. And that's now all built into the rules. And that's been really interesting to see from a judge's perspective, because you could see how your own decisions based on the rules that they've set drive competitors to make robots that are flashier and more destructive and really satisfy the needs of the audience in a way that I think the original show hadn't.
Yeah, that's definitely part of it. And I think too, a big difference now is where, with the teams and things like that, like, back in the Comedy Central days, for the most part, aside from Lisa Winter and maybe a couple of other people, I didn't really, remember who the teams were. I knew who the robots were, but there wasn't so much a focus on the people aspect of it, where I think now there's a much bigger focus on the story, and like every team kind of has their own like theme and their niche that they're in, and that's really like developed out. So like people watch it not just for the robots but for the people, and I think that's kind of neat to see that change.
Yeah, I think that in the early days of the Comedy Central show, that was very much the case, similar to the way it is now. And I think that's why the rules have been constructed, is kind of bring it back to that, because I do know in the later seasons on Comedy Central, a lot of the competitors that competed for show were eliminated because the drive was to build the better robot, not the more entertaining robot. So those of us who built the entertaining robots were eliminated by these very aggressive blocks and wedges. Nothing against blocks and wedges, but without an offensive weapon, they're not as entertaining to watch,
Yeah, I mean, it does depend on the match. I've definitely seen some pretty entertaining ones, not necessarily with a wedge in particular, but I mean a lot of control bots that are pretty interesting to watch these days. But yeah, it's that definitely is a big factor. And I will say that, like, for the entertainment value, there's definitely something to be said for the robots that maybe don't win as many matches, but just are really cool to look at. Without getting into, any result type of things, like Doomba from the new season is a really great example of just a robot that is so fun. And I'm excited to see how that plays out on TV.
Yeah, it's actually interesting to watch the evolution of these robots as they compete too. So much of it is so experimental that you really don't know. One of the things that we were keenly aware of when we competed is like, you could come up with the best design ever, and then a simple thing like a wire coming loose could be the reason you lose. So that also meant that you never know, when you put two robots in the arena and all the different variables of physics involved, who's going to win. It's never easy to predict, and sometimes most builders, I think, redesign things to try to refine the robot and make it better every season. But inevitably, you're going to run into that situation where you're going to redesign it and it's going to make it worse. That does happen too. So I think you saw it, even at the beginning of season 8, the 7th World Championship, the champion, first match out, the champion from last year, lost, and they were undefeated the year before, and part of that was they were experimenting with a new design. So it's pretty interesting. The match that I actually lost against the Brick of Doom, which is that plywood robot I was referring to earlier, they had driven their spike through my robot, and it died, and we didn't know why. And then they separated the robots, and my robot was completely dead. So I lost that match. And then when we went into the arena and I opened up the robot, all that thing had done, the spike had just flipped my off switch, which is a tiny little toggle switch, and it just delicately switched it off. It didn't break it out of its connection. It didn't do any other damage to the robot. All I had to do is flip the robot back on, and it was perfect. So for this one hole, and that's basically how they won that match. But that shows exactly how random winning in a match can be.
It is, yeah, because I like the match that always comes back to mind. And I don't know if you recall this one, but it was a match that Duck had against Cobalt, and like I was so glad to talk to Hal Rucker about it, because it was like Duck was getting torn apart by Cobalt. I mean, like, you would look and say Duck is not going to win this match, and then Cobalt got like high centered on a piece of the arena and couldn't move. And that, like, you don't know, that stuff happens.
Yeah, that actually is the reason why a lot of people ask, during the fights, once a robot is immobilized, one of the things that people do, or used to do a lot more, was put on a good show. They would go and they would hit that robot, free it up, so they can continue fighting. But there have been so many matches where they would have won if they had just left it, and then they hit it, and then they end up losing the match to the robot that was immobilized, like moments before, sometimes instantly. And that's happened enough times to where now, if you see an immobilized robots, most people will just stay away from it and just let it sit, because it is a legitimate way to win that competition. And it also, I've seen robots get destroyed completely and make it very difficult for them to come back for other competitions by showboating and by hitting that robot, even though they don't need to. So there's a lot of psychology that goes into the matches and the strategies that people use, that I always find really interesting.
Yeah, because, especially with when you're looking at the qualifying matches, which is, what we're going through right now, I think all of the builders have in mind, the selection committee is watching these matches, and you want to make them as impressive as possible, because if it's between like you and another robot, you want them to say, hey, they had a really solid win, but there's risk there.
Yeah, it's very sophisticated, the whole system.
Do you think that it's like less risky now because of some of the rule changes, like for example taking the crab walking out of things, you know, that you maybe can be a little bit disabled and hobbling around, but you're not going to get counted out for crab walking. So as long as you're not completely immobile, then you still have a chance. Like, do you think that that makes it a little bit easier to take those risks, or is it still like something that you would think they should stay away from?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I was asking myself the same question when I saw that rule change. It's so funny because I saw examples of where it worked to people's benefit, but I've also seen examples where it worked against people. It's really hard to quantify because the matches are so uniquely different. You know, so yeah, I never landed on a good answer for that. And I asked myself that same question: is like, oh, okay, is this gonna? You know, I do think that I like it because there have been those really interesting matches where both robots or one of the robots is crab walking, but then strikes a really impressive blow. And if they were eliminated from crab walking, then you wouldn't get that last little exciting bit of the fight.
Yeah, and some drivers really thrive on, you know, even if their robot is disabled or missing a wheel, they're still able to drive well. I mean, Daniel Freitas for Minotaur is a really great example of a driver who can do that. So, you know, if you're a good driver, it doesn't matter. You can find a way to work around it.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've definitely seen robots win while crab walking many times, actually. So it's possible. It's definitely possible. I think it's a positive rule change for sure. Just for who? It's mainly for the audience. I don't know about in each competition. It depends on what the results are, of course. So you know, like I said, it'll work for or against a competitor, but either way, I think the audience wins.
Yes, yes, that is, I would definitely agree there. I think that it's a welcome change, you know, for a lot of the fans that maybe had some issues with some things from last season. So, you know, I'm excited to obviously see how that plays out in the qualifying matches. I'm also curious because, you know, the last time you were a judge, different venue, you know, obviously a lot has changed since then. Were there any like, you know, surprises or just things that you found interesting coming back to BattleBots, but in this new, like more permanent venue in Vegas?
I was excited to be back. I don't know. For me, I'd been away long enough that mostly I was just thriving on the energy level of the crowd and to see the arena in its, you know, kind of all its glory, the lights and the sounds, and to see, you know, these massive robots destroying each other. All of that was like kind of just overwhelmed me in a very positive way. Hugs all around. It was great to see everybody. I think for the biggest difference, I think between ABC and Discovery has been in the rules, the way they've kind of evolved and changed through the years. There was definitely a lengthy briefing before we started judging the events for Discovery Channel. Or before I did. I know that, you know, there were other judges before me there, but it was my first time on Discovery. I think one of the biggest shifts was there was a different focus on aggression in the ABC rules versus the new rules. So I remember during the ABC competitions, shoving was not considered a form of aggression. And that was a huge shift from everything, you know, preceding ABC. I remember a specific match with Donald Hudson where he had shoved the robot around a bunch. He was clearly dominating the match, but with that rule set and not being able to count shoving as a form of aggression, the points actually scored against him, and the other robot got a couple hits in early. And he lost that, even though, and I was always cringing to think of what kind of hate we were going to get from the audience when they saw that, because you see it, you see very clearly he's got control over the whole match, but then he loses because of the way the point structure was. And that might be one of the reasons they shifted back to allowing shoving as a higher form of aggression. There still is a much greater score emphasis on creating damage versus shoving people around, but now shoving is back to a form of aggression, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing for me, because every year inevitably fans get into debates over different judges' decisions and things like that, and it always happens. But I think that most fans, understandably think with their hearts of like, I like this team, or maybe they're only looking at one aspect of things and not looking at the whole rule set and saying, well, why did it judge this way? But like by the rules, by what the rules actually are, it was the correct decision. So it's something that has to be taken into account.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that fortunately, I think that worked in our favor when we had the Donald Hudson match. But yeah, the rules are pretty complicated. It's not surprising at all to see audience members getting upset about certain rulings. If you don't understand the rules, what you see in the arena can be very, very different than what we see just keeping score for the different categories. So yeah, it's not always what you perceive, and we do take the job very, very seriously. The three of us, Lisa, Derek, and I, we're all competitors, and we know how much work goes into building a robot. We know how much blood, sweat, and tears you bring with you to the arena. That how much energy goes into building a robot, how much emotion goes into building a robot. So we would never rule in a way that was unfair to a competitor, because we know what it's like to feel like as being one of those competitors. Everyone needs to win fair and square. All that being said, there are these split decisions sometimes that, with the scoring, it's just very, very, very close. That's why sometimes we do have to get out of our seats and go into the arena. And it's like sometimes it's as minimal as like counting the amount of scratches on this one versus this one. I mean, if that's all they got, that's all you have to go from, and those are the ones that are really hard to judge. And then sometimes, because of the rules, you will end up with those matches where you feel like I've had matches where I felt like I knew who won, but then when I sit down and I work through the scoring system, I might be surprised myself as to who actually won, because it's all about the rules, and it's not about my feelings on the match, and it's not about how it appears in the arena. It's about the scoring system. So yeah, I'll be interested to see this season what the fans think of the rulings. Because there are definitely those matches that are really close, and you just I don't ever feel like I'm terribly unsure of my decisions, but I do feel like I could see why the perception from the audience might disagree.
Yes. And I mean, I've watched matches multiple times where one time I watched it, I saw something, and then another time I watched it, I'm like, oh, that's not the way that I remember it. So like, you never know. Hindsight is 2020, and so it's not everybody's going to see things the same way, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, and also when you're there live, there's a lot of things you see in the arena from our seats, front row, that you don't necessarily see on camera. The camera might not even be pointed at the right side of the robot when something occurs, and that could sometimes give a different kind of impression of what that fight was for the audience versus what we see sitting there.
Yes, there's a lot of different things that factor into it, for sure. Now, I also wanted to ask too, with doing the judging. I mean, granted, it's a small portion of the year. But has that been a pretty easy adjustment? Because obviously, like, you're very busy. I know that you're working on a lot of different projects. So is that been pretty easy to work into your schedule with doing this?
Yeah, I won't lie. It's complicated, but it's worth it to me to again, be a part of the community and just be able to see old friends. And it's been so many decades now, I can't imagine not doing it. So fortunately, also because it is so public facing, a lot of my clients and the people I work with are understandable or understanding when it comes to shifting my schedule around to make it work.
Well, that's great. I mean, I think most, if not all people that are in the robotics community, you know, that are builders or judges or what have you, this is BattleBots is not all that they do. They have very busy lives and careers outside of it, so it's pretty common.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. This is yeah, it's a lot. I don't even know where to begin. We have, I mean, because now it's a lot different than when I first started competing. I was just a model maker at ILM. And so it was and ILM competed, so it was very easy to schedule that in. But now I'm running my own company, and we have stages, we have sound booth, we have art department, we have like all the different departments that you would expect at a production studio. We're doing crazy big projects. Everything we do is weird and robotic or animatronic or miniature. And so there's just a lot of moving parts. It's a very complex business. So I would say it's definitely more complicated to find the time to do the BattleBots. But like I said, again, a lot of actually, I've been really surprised to see how many text messages and notes that I've received from people since the show aired, the premiere aired last night, of people who are fans that I didn't know were fans.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
You know, clients and people that I've worked with through the years. One notable, I got a text from Duff Goldman from we worked together on Cake Masters.
Okay.
We made a robotic cake. In addition to, it was a transforming robot cake, and then we also made a Skylanders animatronic cake for Food Network. But he did, what was his show? Ace of Cakes, I think. Yeah. Yeah, so but he texted me once the show was on. He was like, "Hey, I didn't know you were on that show." So that was pretty cool. That was fun.
Yeah, that's funny that, you know, even people such as yourself who, you know, who've worked with like, you know, so many top people out there, that people are still like, "Oh my gosh, you're on that show."
Yeah, that was pretty fun.
That's awesome. You know, I as far as the first episode, because obviously that just came out, you know, what's your, you know, overall impression? You know, obviously we can't talk about what's going to happen the rest of the season in detail, but I mean, I know from what I have seen, and Greg has said this as well, because Greg was on my show recently, that this is one of the best seasons of BattleBots ever. And I hope that a lot of fans agree once they get to see everything.
Yeah, I'm very excited to actually I want to spread the word. It is I will say that every single year that BattleBots has been in existence, it gets better and better and better, and this is no exception. I remember the first time I saw, and this was on the ABC show, a flying flaming robot. I made sure that I said it. It's a flying flaming robot, and it was a really good decision to shift to just heavyweight robots. It is so destructive. It is so powerful. It is so impressive to see the engineering that goes into these machines at that scale. The fact that fire is allowed again is wonderful. I know it's been in for a while now, but it's just so, I don't even have words. It's so exciting, and this is definitely one of the best seasons I've ever seen. The fights are ferocious. There's lots of carnage. There's yeah, and it's still mind-blowing to me when you see a piece get ripped off of a robot and thrown across the arena, and it takes a chunk out of the polycarbonate. You think about the forces at work there. The polycarbonate is 1.25 inches thick, you know, and you see these huge gouges taken out of it. It's bulletproof glass. It's thicker than bulletproof glass. And then you've got, you know, the robots are made of steel and aluminum, and they're just scooping out pieces of each other and throwing them across the room. That is just an incredible amount of force. It's hard to even imagine that amount of force. And that's what's going on in that box. And you know, just the number of times you see robots thrown up in the air. And not only do they get thrown up in the air at you know, the 250 pounds, but they also land and then continue to drive. Like, all of it is just mind-blowing and just makes for a really good show.
I could not agree more. You know, I've been watching this for 20 years, and I hope, you know, the sport is definitely growing. I think that there is so much interest out there now. You know, with younger people, they have a lot of robotics programs in the schools and things like that that they never had before. And so I really hope that this will continue to grow, not only the sport, but just, you know, robotics and things like that in general, because I think that it's so needed.
Yeah, I think it's a really healthy thing too. I mean, because it really, when you build a robot, you have to study so many different systems. It's exciting to see it become so accessible. You know, you could buy a lot of this stuff on Amazon or robot marketplace. There's places to actually buy this stuff. When we were first starting out, there was nothing specific for robots out there. You were just buying industrial supplies. So yeah, no, it's a good time for robotics. And I think that there's actually a lot of useful skills that come from building robots. There have been a lot of people who started with Battlebots way back in the day that were students or amateur robot builders and stuff that have moved on to working on robotic systems for companies. You know, so you know, that exercise of creating and destroying and learning from mistakes and refining those, you know, variables in an engineered design really help in the workplace. And we're also seeing a lot more robots in the workplace. Like, they're becoming more and more common. We're actually building a robot actor right now named Skylar.
Yes, yes. I've seen
robot,
that.
That will be rentable for shows and movies and television. So we're also trying to foster the use of robots in entertainment in new and different ways as well.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff. But yeah, we have a very exciting season of BattleBots here to come. It's a long season. You know, I looked at the schedule and I'm like, wow, it's going to be March and we're still not even in the tournament phase of things. So very exciting. But you know, I'm so happy that you are back involved with the show. And you know, I hope a lot of fans will watch this and, you know, be as excited as I am. So
it's an exciting season also because they opened it up to where they're guaranteeing every competitor at least 4 matches, you know, just to get into the championship. So that is a lot of fighting. I was actually surprised that like if I had heard that as a competitor, I'd be like, no, I want less fights. I was shocked at how, I mean, that just shows how much confidence these people have with their robots compared to our kind of duct tape ones back in the day. But it's like they were very excited to do that many fights. And so, you know, I think what that also does is the robots going into the championship have already been in a lot of fights. So that just kind of adds a different level of excitement because they're, you know, they're kind of battle worn before they even get into the championship. So it's going to be a really good season.
yep, durability is the name of the game. So well, yeah, it's going to be really exciting. You know, everybody obviously keep watching this show because there's going to be so much more great content coming. And you know, like it's going to be an exciting season. So I'm so thrilled to have had you on the show, Fon, and we'll see if there's any exciting judges decisions to come.
I think there'll definitely be some exciting decisions. Controversy, perhaps. Like I said, it's not always as clear as it might look on camera. So we'll see. I'll be really interested to see what the internet says about our choices.
Yeah, everybody on Reddit, get ready to type your opinions. Well, yes. So, you know, everybody that's watching, make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, all of that good stuff that you've been doing, and we'll see you next time on the show with Ripperoni.
Nice.